I was standing in my driveway in Phoenix, Arizona, staring at a certified letter from the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association that accused me of creating a public hazard and eyesore with what they called an excessive and dangerous collection of propane tanks. The fine was $2,000, payable within 30 days, or they would place a lien on my property. My name is Wesley Davidson, and I run a mobile catering business specializing in outdoor events across the Phoenix metropolitan area. The propane tanks in question were neatly stored along the side of my house, properly secured, and completely necessary for my livelihood. I had 12 20-pound tanks, 4 100-pound cylinders, and 2 commercial-grade tanks that I used for my industrial cooking equipment. Every single one of them was legal, permitted, and inspected by the fire marshal's office. The letter came on a Tuesday morning in late March when the Arizona sun was already starting to hint at the brutal summer ahead. I had just returned from a corporate event in Scottsdale, where I had served 200 people without incident. My trucks were clean, my equipment was maintained, and I was feeling pretty good about my business until I opened that envelope. The complaint was filed by Patricia Henderson, the president of the HOA board. I knew Patricia. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Patricia. She was the kind of woman who measured the height of your grass with a ruler and reported Christmas decorations left up past January 2nd. She drove a white Lexus SUV that she kept spotless and wore tennis visors even when she was not playing tennis. Her signature was on every petty violation notice that circulated through our community of 150 homes. I walked back into my house where my girlfriend Claire Olson was making coffee in the kitchen. She looked up when I came in and immediately noticed my expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down her mug. I handed her the letter without saying anything. Claire had moved in with me 6 months ago, and she had quickly learned about the peculiarities of living in an HOA-controlled neighborhood. She read through the document, her eyes widening as she reached the amount of the fine. $2,000. For propane tanks that you need for your business. She looked at me incredulously. Can they even do that? That's what I'm going to find out, I said, pulling out my phone. But first, I'm calling the fire marshal's office to get documentation on everything. The fire marshal's office in Phoenix was located downtown, and I had dealt with them many times over the years. They were professional, thorough, and fair. When I called and explained my situation, they connected me with Inspector Raymond Torres, who had personally inspected my property and issued my permits. "Mr. Davidson, I remember your setup," Inspector Torres said over the phone. "You were meticulous about following every regulation. Give me your address again and I'll pull up your file." I gave him the information and waited while he looked through his records. The sound of keyboard clicking came through the phone and then he spoke again. "Right, I have it here. Your inspection was done last October and everything passed with flying colors. You have proper ventilation, adequate spacing between tanks, appropriate securing mechanisms, and all your equipment is up to code. Your permits are valid for another 1.5 years. Can you send me official documentation of that?" I asked. "My HOA is trying to fine me $2,000, claiming the tanks are dangerous and violate community standards." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear Inspector Torres exhale slowly. "Your HOA doesn't supersede fire safety codes. If anything, they should be happy you're so compliant with regulations. Most people cut corners. I'll send you a certified letter on official letterhead confirming everything. Should I also note that any interference with legally permitted safety equipment could constitute a violation of city ordinances?" "That would be fantastic," I said, feeling a small measure of relief. "Thank you. I'll have it in the mail today," he he assured me. "And Mr. Davidson, don't let them bully you. You're doing everything right." After I hung up, Claire was looking at me with a mixture of concern and anger. "What kind of HOA fines someone for following the law, the kind run by Patricia Henderson?" I muttered. "But I'm not paying this fine. I'm going to fight it." The next step was to formally respond to the HOA's notice. According to their bylaws, I had the right to contest any fine by requesting a hearing before the board. I sat down at my computer and drafted a detailed response, citing my permits, the fire marshal's inspection, and relevant Arizona state laws regarding commercial equipment storage on residential property. I kept my tone professional but firm, making it clear that I would not be paying the fine and expected the matter to be dropped immediately. I sent the response via certified mail and email, ensuring there would be a paper trail for everything. Then I called my lawyer, Marcus Chen, who had helped me set up my business a few years back. "Wesley, good to hear from you," Marcus said when he picked up. "How's the catering business?" "Business is great, but I've got an HOA problem." I explained the situation, and I could almost hear Marcus shaking his head through the phone. "HOAs are tricky because they operate in a weird legal gray area," he explained. "They have authority granted by the CC and Articus that you agreed to when you bought the property, but they can't override state or federal law. If you have permits from the fire marshal and you're in compliance with all safety regulations, they don't have a leg to stand on." "So what's my best move here?" I asked. "Document everything. Get that letter from the fire marshal. Keep copies of all your permits and inspection reports. When they schedule a hearing, I'll go with you. We'll present the facts, and if they still try to enforce the fine, we'll take it to court if necessary. But honestly, most HOAs back down when they realize they're legally in the wrong and facing potential litigation." "What about the lien threat?" I asked. "Can they actually put a lien on my house over this?" "They can try, but a court would likely remove it once we present your evidence. The bigger issue is that fighting this could cost you in legal fees, even though you're in the right. That's how some HOAs operate. They count on people paying the fine rather than dealing with the hassle and expense of fighting back." "I'm not paying," I said firmly. "This is my livelihood, and I've done everything by the book." "Good," Marcus said. "Then let's fight this properly. I'll draft a formal legal response to accompany yours. We'll make it clear that you're not only contesting the fine, but also prepared to pursue legal action if they continue with this harassment." Over the next week, I gathered every piece of documentation related to my propane tank storage. I had my original permits from the city, my inspection reports, photographs of the setup showing proper spacing and security, and my business license. Inspector Torres sent me the promised letter on official Phoenix Fire Marshal letterhead, stating unequivocally that my propane storage was compliant with all fire safety codes and posed no hazard to the community. The HOA scheduled a hearing for the following Thursday evening at 7 o'clock at the community clubhouse. I marked it on my calendar and prepared my presentation like I was going to trial. Marcus reviewed everything and helped me organize my arguments into a clear, logical sequence. Claire offered to come with me for moral support, but I asked her to stay home. "This might get heated," I told her, "and I want to keep it focused on the facts, not turn it into a spectacle." "Just don't let Patricia push you around," Claire said. "You know she's going to try." Thursday evening arrived, and I drove to the clubhouse with my folder of documents and a recording device. Arizona is a one-party consent state for recordings, which meant I could legally record the proceedings without anyone's permission. I wanted a record of everything that was said. The clubhouse was a modest building near the neighborhood entrance, with a meeting room that could hold about 50 people. When I arrived, Patricia was already there, along with 4 other board members. I recognized them all. Donald Cramer, the vice president who owned a car dealership, Sharon Wu, the treasurer who was retired from accounting, Gary Feldman, the secretary who worked in real estate, and Linda Morrison, an at-large member who taught at a local elementary school. Patricia looked up when I walked in, her expression already set in disapproval. She was wearing a navy blazer over a white blouse, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked like she was dressed for a corporate board meeting rather than a neighborhood dispute. "Mr. Davidson," she said coolly, "please take a seat. We'll begin shortly." I sat down in one of the folding chairs facing the board's table. Marcus arrived a few minutes later, carrying his briefcase. Patricia's eyes narrowed when she saw him. "This is a private HOA matter," she said. "There's no need for attorneys. Mr. Davidson has the right to legal representation," Marcus said smoothly, taking the seat beside me. "But I'm here primarily as an observer. Mr. Davidson will be speaking for himself." Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but Donald Cramer leaned over and whispered something to her. She pressed her lips together and nodded. "Very well," she said. "Let's begin. This hearing concerns violation number 2047, filed against property located at 4256 Desert Willow Drive, owned by Wesley Davidson. The violation states that Mr. Davidson is storing an excessive number of propane tanks on his property, creating a visual blight and potential safety hazard in violation of Section 7.3 of our Community Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. She read it all in a flat, bureaucratic tone, as if she were a judge pronouncing sentence. I kept my expression neutral and waited for her to finish. "Mr. Davidson, you've submitted a written response contesting this violation. Would you like to present your case to the board?" I stood up, holding my folder. "Yes, thank you. First, I want to clarify what we're talking about. I operate a licensed mobile catering business that serves events throughout the Phoenix area. As part of that business, I use commercial-grade propane equipment for cooking. The propane tanks stored on my property are necessary for that business and are stored in full compliance with Phoenix fire codes." I pulled out the first document and placed it on the table in front of the board. "This is my business license, issued by the City of Phoenix. It specifically lists my property address as my business location." Patricia glanced at it dismissively. "Having a business license doesn't exempt you from HOA regulations." "Correct," I said, "but this does." I placed the fire marshal's letter on the table. "This is official documentation from Phoenix Fire Marshal Inspector Raymond Torres, dated last week, confirming that my propane storage meets or exceeds all safety requirements. The tanks are properly secured, properly ventilated, and pose no hazard to the community." Sharon Wu picked up the letter and read it carefully, her expression thoughtful. "This does seem pretty definitive," she said quietly. Patricia's jaw tightened. "The issue isn't just safety, it's also aesthetics. Section 7.3 of our CC and Articus clearly states that no equipment or materials related to commercial business activities may be visible from the street or adjacent properties." "My tanks aren't visible from the street," I countered. "They're located along the side of my house, behind a 6-foot privacy fence. The only way to see them is if you're standing in my driveway or deliberately looking over the fence from my neighbor's yard." "We have photographs," Patricia said, pulling out her own folder. She slid several printed images across the table. They showed my property from various angles, and in one of them, taken from an elevated position, you could see the tops of some of my propane tanks over the fence. "These were taken from where?" I asked, looking at the images. Patricia hesitated for a fraction of a second. From various vantage points in the neighborhood. That one was taken from at least 8 feet off the ground, I said, pointing to the image showing my tanks. Did you use a ladder to look into my yard? The method of documentation isn't relevant, Patricia said quickly. The point is that the tanks are visible and constitute a violation. Marcus cleared his throat. Actually, in Arizona, using a ladder or elevated position to photograph someone's private property without permission could constitute trespassing or invasion of privacy. But more importantly, the CC and articles specify visible from the street or adjacent properties at normal sight lines. A 6-foot fence provides adequate screening for normal visibility. Donald Kramer leaned forward. Look, I think we might be getting ahead of ourselves here. Wesley, I've known you for 3 years. You're a good neighbor, you keep your property nice, and you're running a legitimate business. Maybe we can find a compromise. What if you added some additional screening or moved some of the tanks? I appreciated his attempt at diplomacy, but I wasn't interested in compromising when I had done nothing wrong. I respect the suggestion, Donald, but I've already invested significant time and money into my current setup to ensure it meets all legal requirements. The fire marshal has confirmed that my storage is not only safe but optimal. Moving things around could actually decrease safety and put me out of compliance. Then perhaps you should consider relocating your business to a commercial property, Patricia interjected. Residential neighborhoods aren't meant for industrial operations. My business isn't industrial. It's mobile catering, and operating from a home base is standard in this industry, I said, keeping my voice level. I've checked the CC and articles thoroughly. There's nothing that prohibits home-based businesses, and Arizona law specifically protects the right to operate qualifying businesses from residential properties. The CC and articles prohibit nuisances, Patricia insisted. 18 propane tanks constitute a nuisance. According to whom? Marcus asked. Has Mr. Davidson received any complaints from his immediate neighbors? Any reports of odors, noise, or actual problems? Patricia shuffled through her papers. We've received concerns from community members. Can you name them? I asked. That information is confidential, Patricia said. Convenient, I muttered. Gary Feldman, who had been silent until now, spoke up. I actually drive past Wesley's house fairly regularly. I've never noticed his propane tanks. I didn't even know they were there until this complaint was filed. Patricia shot him an annoyed look. That doesn't change the fact that they are there and they violate our community standards. Which standards specifically? Marcus asked. We've reviewed the CC and articles, and Mr. Davidson is in compliance. Section 7.3 addresses commercial equipment visible from public spaces, which these tanks are not. Section 4.1 addresses safety hazards, which these tanks are not, as confirmed by the fire marshal. What specific provision is he violating? Patricia's face was reddening. The spirit of the regulations clearly indicates that this type of storage is inappropriate. The spirit, I said, unable to hide my frustration. You're trying to fine me $2,000 based on the spirit of vague regulations. Mr. Davidson, I'd remind you to maintain a respectful tone, Patricia said sharply. I'm being perfectly respectful, I replied. But I'm also not going to pay a $2,000 fine for something that isn't a violation. I have permits. I have inspections. I have documentation from city officials confirming that everything I'm doing is legal and safe. What I don't have is any actual evidence that I'm violating HOA rules. Linda Morrison, who had been listening quietly, raised her hand slightly. I have a question. Wesley, when you bought your house, Did you disclose to the HOA that you'd be operating a catering business from the property? I didn't disclose it because I wasn't required to, I said. I bought the house before I started the business. When I did start the business, I obtained all necessary permits and licenses from the city. The HOA has no provision requiring notification of home-based businesses as long as they comply with all other regulations. But don't you think it would have been courteous to give us a heads up? Patricia asked, her tone dripping with condescension. With all due respect, I don't need the HOA's permission to operate a legal business from my home, I said. Just like I don't need your permission to own 3 cars or paint my living room or install a new refrigerator. Those are all things that happen within my property and within my rights as a homeowner. This board has a responsibility to maintain property values and community standards, Patricia said. If we allow one person to store commercial equipment, what's to stop others from turning their homes into warehouses or workshops? The same regulations that already exist, Marcus said. The CC and Articus already address these issues. You can't arbitrarily decide that something is a violation just because you personally don't like it. That's not how HOAs work, and it's definitely not how the law works. The board members exchanged glances. Sharon Wu looked uncomfortable. Gary Feldman was nodding slightly at Marcus's words. Donald Kramer seemed torn. Only Patricia and Linda Morrison appeared committed to pursuing the fine. I'd like to call for a vote, Patricia announced. All in favor of upholding the violation and fine. Patricia and Linda raised their hands immediately. After a long pause, the other 3 board members kept their hands down. Motion fails, Donald Kramer said. 3-2. Patricia's expression hardened. Then I move that we table this matter and conduct further investigation. Investigation of what? Gary Feldman asked. The fire marshal has already confirmed everything is safe and legal. Investigation of whether Mr. Davidson's business operations constitute a nuisance in other ways, Patricia said. Traffic, noise, hours of operation. I'm sure we can find something. I felt anger rising in my chest, but Marcus put a hand on my arm. Miss Henderson, are you saying that you intend to continue searching for ways to find Mr. Davidson, regardless of whether he's in compliance with existing regulations? I'm saying that this board has a duty to explore all aspects of community concerns, Patricia said stiffly. Then perhaps Mr. Davidson should file a formal complaint against the board for harassment, Marcus suggested, because that's what this is starting to sound like. The room fell silent. Sharon Wu cleared her throat. I think we should drop this matter entirely. Wesley has provided ample documentation that he's in compliance with safety regulations, and the fire marshal's letter makes it clear that his storage setup is appropriate. Unless we have actual evidence of a specific violation, we're wasting everyone's time and potentially exposing the HOA to legal liability. I agree, Gary Feldman said. Motion to dismiss the violation and remove the fine. Second, Donald Kramer added. All in favor? Gary asked. 3 hands went up. Patricia glared at her fellow board members but said nothing. Linda Morrison looked disappointed but didn't argue. Motion passes, Gary said. The violation is dismissed and the fine is voided. Wesley, I apologize for the trouble. This should never have gotten this far. I nodded, gathering my documents. I appreciate that, but I want it noted formally that if the HOA continues to pursue this matter without legitimate cause, I'll consider it harassment and take appropriate legal action. So noted, Gary said, making a notation on his pad. Patricia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This meeting is adjourned. She walked out without another word, Linda Morrison trailing behind her. Marcus and I left the clubhouse together, walking to our cars in the parking lot. The evening air was cooling down and the sky was fading to deep purple. "That went better than expected," Marcus said, "but watch your back. Patricia Henderson seems like the type who doesn't let things go." "I got that impression," I said. "Think she'll try something else, probably." "Document everything from here on out. Keep records of your business activities, your comings and goings, anything that could potentially be used against you. If she files another complaint, we'll be ready." I drove home feeling relieved but also uneasy. I had won this round, but I had the distinct feeling that Patricia wasn't done with me. When I got home, Claire was waiting up, and I filled her in on everything that had happened. "3 of the board members sided with you," she said. "That's good, right?" "It's good for now," I said. "But Patricia is the president and she clearly has an agenda. I don't think this is over." I was right. 2 weeks later, I received another certified letter. This time, the complaint was about excessive commercial vehicle traffic and noise disturbances during early morning hours. The fine was $1,500. I stared at the letter in disbelief. My commercial vehicles consisted of 1 catering truck and 1 van, both of which were parked in my driveway or garage. I left for events at various times depending on the booking, but I wasn't running a fleet of delivery trucks through the neighborhood. "She's making stuff up now," Claire said when I showed her the letter. "This is insane." "It's harassment," I agreed, "and now we're going to prove it." I called Marcus immediately. He was not surprised. "I was expecting something like this. Start keeping a detailed log of your vehicle movements. Note the time you leave, the time you return, and what you were doing. We'll also want to talk to your neighbors and see if any of them have actually complained about noise or traffic." I spent the next few days talking to my immediate neighbors. Jim and Carol Peterson lived to my right, an elderly couple who had been in the neighborhood for 20 years. When I asked if they had any issues with my business activities, Jim looked confused. "Issues? What kind of issues? We barely know you're there, son. You're quieter than the previous owner who used to rev his motorcycle at 6 in the morning." Sarah Martinez lived to my left with her 2 kids. She was a single mother who worked as a nurse at Phoenix Children's Hospital. "Are you kidding?" she said when I asked if I disturbed her. "You're the best neighbor I've ever had. You helped me jump my car last winter and you gave my kids free samples from that barbecue event you catered. If the HOA is giving you trouble, let me know. I'll testify on your behalf." The neighbors across the street, David and Jennifer Wung, said the same thing. Nobody had complained about me. Nobody had even noticed any problems. Armed with written statements from all 4 neighboring households, I submitted another formal response to the HOA, again requesting a hearing. This time, I was angrier. The response I drafted was more forceful, and Marcus added language about malicious prosecution and harassment. The second hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, I installed a security camera system around my property. If Patricia was going to continue making up violations, I was going to have video evidence to refute her claims. The cameras proved useful almost immediately. One afternoon, I was out on a catering job in Temp when I got a motion alert on my phone. I checked the camera feed and saw Patricia Henderson standing in my driveway, taking photographs of my house and vehicles with a professional-looking camera. I immediately saved the video footage and sent it to Marcus. "This is perfect," he said when I called him. "She's building a case against you, but she's also documenting her own pattern of harassment." The security cameras captured something else interesting a few days later. At 7 in the morning, a white Lexus SUV drove slowly past my house 3 times in a row. The driver was clearly Patricia, and she appeared to be recording video with her phone while driving. She's trying to catch you doing something wrong, Claire observed as we watched the footage together. She's obsessed. She's going to be disappointed, I said, because I'm not doing anything wrong. The second hearing arrived, and this time, several of my neighbors asked if they could attend. Jim Peterson, Sarah Martinez, and David Wung all showed up to the clubhouse that evening, sitting in the chairs behind me in a show of support. Patricia's expression when she saw them was priceless. Her carefully maintained composure cracked for just a moment, and I saw genuine frustration flash across her face. The hearing began much like the first one, with Patricia reading the formal complaint about traffic and noise. This time, however, I was even more prepared. "Let's address the traffic complaint first," I said, standing up with my documentation. "According to the complaint, I'm generating excessive commercial vehicle traffic. Here's a detailed log of every time I've left my property in a commercial vehicle over the past 2 months. As you can see, I average 3 to 4 trips per week, usually during mid-morning or early afternoon. I'm not running a delivery service. I'm operating a mobile catering business that requires me to drive to events." I handed copies to each board member. "For comparison, here's data showing that the average household in our neighborhood generates 12 vehicle trips per week. I'm generating half the traffic of a typical family." "But your vehicles are commercial vehicles," Patricia argued. "They're not the same as personal cars." "They're vans and a truck," I said. "They're not tractor-trailers or buses. My catering truck is smaller than most RVs, and several people in this neighborhood own RVs." "RVs are different," Patricia said. "How?" I asked. "They're both large vehicles used for specific purposes. The only difference is that mine is related to my business." Donald Kramer cleared his throat. "Wesley has a point. We allow RVs, boats, and other large vehicles. We can't single out his commercial vehicles unless they're actually causing a problem." "They are causing a problem," Patricia insisted. "Multiple residents have complained about noise disturbances in the early morning hours." "Which residents?" I asked. "Because I've spoken to all 4 of my immediate neighbors and none of them have complained. In fact, they've all provided written statements supporting me." I handed over the statements from the Petersons, Sarah Martinez, and the Wungs. Sharon Wu read through them carefully, and I saw her expression soften. "These are pretty emphatic," she said. "Jim Peterson even says that Wesley is the quietest neighbor they've had in years." "The complaints came from other community members," Patricia said vaguely. "Then name them," I demanded. "If people are filing complaints against me, I have the right to know who they are and address their concerns directly." "That information is confidential," Patricia repeated. "No, it's not," Marcus interjected. "According to Arizona HOA law, a homeowner has the right to confront their accusers in any dispute involving fines or sanctions. If there are actual complaints, they need to be disclosed. If there aren't any complaints, then this is a fraudulent charge." The other board members were looking at Patricia now with expressions ranging from concern to suspicion. Gary Feldman leaned forward. "Patricia, are there actual complaints or did you file this yourself?" Patricia's face flushed. "As president of this board, I have the authority to identify violations whether or not a formal complaint has been filed." "So there are no complaints," I said flatly. "You're making this up." "I'm not making anything up," Patricia said, her voice rising. "I've personally observed excessive traffic and noise coming from your property." "Really?" I pulled out my laptop and opened it on the table. "Then you won't mind explaining this." I played the video footage of Patricia driving past my house repeatedly at 7 in the morning, recording with her phone. The room went silent. Everyone stared at the screen as the video played, showing Patricia's Lexus making 3 slow passes in front of my house. "That's surveillance without my knowledge or consent," Patricia sputtered. "That's footage from my security camera recording public streets and my own property," I countered. "Which is completely legal. What's not legal is filing false violation reports and harassing homeowners." Jim Peterson stood up from his seat behind me. "If I may say something, I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years, and I've never seen the HOA act like this. Wesley is a good kid who runs an honest business and bothers nobody. This is wrong." Sarah Martinez stood up next. "I work night shifts at the hospital. I'm home during the day when Wesley comes and goes. He's never woken me up, never caused any disturbance. This whole thing feels personal." Sharon Wu set down the statements and looked directly at Patricia. "I think we need to discuss this as a board, privately." Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but the expressions on the other board members' faces stopped her. "Fine. Wesley, if you and your attorney would step outside for a few minutes." Marcus and I, along with my neighbors, went out to the hallway. We waited for about 15 minutes, and I could hear raised voices from inside the meeting room, though I couldn't make out the words. Finally, Gary Feldman opened the door and invited us back in. Patricia was sitting with her arms crossed, her face stony. The other board members looked uncomfortable. "After discussion, the board has voted to dismiss this violation and fine," Gary said. "Additionally, we're implementing a new policy requiring that any future violation complaints against your property must be corroborated by at least 2 board members and include specific, documented evidence." "Thank you," I said, though I was watching Patricia carefully. She looked like she was ready to explode. "This meeting is adjourned," Gary said quickly, and everyone began gathering their things. As I was leaving with Marcus and my neighbors, Patricia stepped in front of me in the parking lot. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "You think you're so clever with your lawyers and your documentation, but you don't belong in this neighborhood. I'm going to find a way to get rid of you." "Is that a threat?" Marcus asked immediately, his phone appearing in his hand. I realized he had started recording. Patricia's eyes widened when she saw the phone. "It's a statement of fact. This board has standards and I intend to uphold them. By harassing a homeowner who's in full compliance with all regulations," Marcus said, "because that sounds like a lawsuit waiting to happen." Patricia turned and walked to her car without another word. Linda Morrison, who had been lingering nearby, hurried after her. Jim Peterson shook his head as we watched them drive away. "That woman is trouble. You be careful, son." "I will," I promised. Over the next few weeks, I thought maybe Patricia had finally given up. The HOA left me alone and I focused on my business. Spring was prime catering season in Phoenix, and I was booked solid with weddings, corporate events, and graduation parties. Then, in late May, something strange happened. I came home from an event one evening to find a notice taped to my door. It was not from the HOA. It was from the City of Phoenix Code Enforcement Division. The notice stated that I was operating a commercial business from a residentially zoned property without proper permits, and that my property was in violation of city zoning ordinances. I was required to cease operations immediately or face fines of up to $500 per day. My stomach dropped. This was different from the HOA complaints. This was the city, and if they revoked my permits or my business license, I was finished. I called Marcus immediately, even though it was 8 o'clock at night. "Someone filed a complaint with the city," I told him. "Code enforcement is saying I'm violating zoning laws." "That's impossible," Marcus said. "We verified all of this when you started your business. Home-based businesses are allowed in residential zones as long as they meet certain criteria. You meet all of them. Can Patricia do this?" Can she file false reports with the city? She can file reports, but if they're false, there will be consequences. Call code enforcement first thing in the morning and request a hearing. We'll need to present all your documentation again, but this should be straightforward. I barely slept that night. My business was my livelihood, and the thought of losing it over Patricia Henderson's vendetta made me furious and sick with worry. The next morning, I called the Code Enforcement Division and spoke with an officer named Robert Chen. I explained the situation and requested a formal inspection and hearing. "I'll need to come out and inspect your property," Officer Chen said. "Can you be available this afternoon?" "Absolutely," I said. "Whatever you need." Officer Chen arrived at 2 o'clock. He was a middle-aged man with a clipboard and a camera, professional and thorough. I showed him my entire setup, explained my business operations, and provided copies of all my permits and licenses. He took notes, photographed everything, and asked detailed questions about my daily activities, the number of employees I had, the hours I operated, and the type of equipment I used. "Mr. Davidson, I'm not seeing any violations here," he said after about an hour. "You're operating a qualifying home-based business. You don't have clients coming to the property, you don't have employees working on site, and your equipment storage is compliant with all codes. Who filed the complaint against you?" "I believe it was Patricia Henderson, the president of my HOA," I said. "She's been trying to shut down my business for months." Officer Chen frowned. "Filing false reports with code enforcement is a serious matter. If we determine that the complaint was made in bad faith, the person who filed it could face penalties." "How do I find out who filed it?" I asked. "You can submit a public records request," Officer Chen said. "The complaint itself is public record. If you want, I can tell you right now that the complaint was filed by a Patricia Henderson at an address in this neighborhood." So it was her. I was not surprised, but having it confirmed made my anger flare. "What happens now?" I asked. "I'll file my report stating that no violations were found. The case will be closed and you can continue operating normally. If Miss Henderson files additional false complaints, she could be charged with misuse of city resources, which is a misdemeanor." "Can you include that information in your report?" I asked. "I want it documented that this was a false complaint." "I'll make it very clear," Officer Chen assured me. "And Mr. Davidson, you might want to consider filing a formal complaint against Miss Henderson with the city attorney's office. This kind of harassment wastes taxpayer money and enforcement resources that should be used for actual violations." That afternoon, after Officer Chen left, I sat down with Marcus and discussed my options. He agreed that I should file a formal complaint and suggested we also send a cease and desist letter to Patricia personally. "We're moving beyond HOA disputes now," Marcus said. "She's filing false reports with city agencies, which is illegal. It's time to make it clear that there will be consequences if she continues." We drafted a strongly worded cease and desist letter, detailing Patricia's pattern of harassment, the false HOA violations, and the false city complaint. The letter stated that any further actions targeting me or my business would result in a lawsuit for harassment, defamation, and intentional interference with business operations. Marcus sent the letter via certified mail to Patricia's home address and copied the entire HOA board. 2 days later, I got a call from Donald Kramer. "Wesley, we need to talk. Can you meet me for coffee?" We met at a Starbucks near the neighborhood. Donald looked stressed, and he ordered a large black coffee before sitting down across from me. "Patricia is out of control," he said without preamble. "After you sent that cease and desist letter, she tried to call an emergency board meeting to have you removed from the neighborhood." She can't do that, I said. I know that, and Gary and Sharon know that. We told her she's going to get the HOA sued and we're not supporting any more of her crusades against you. She went absolutely ballistic, started yelling about how we're not upholding our duties and how you're destroying property values. Property values, I said incredulously. I maintain my property. I'm not running a junkyard. I know, Donald said. The thing is, I think this is personal for her. I did some digging, and it turns out Patricia's son tried to start a food truck business a few years ago. It failed, and he lost a lot of money. I think seeing you succeed with a similar business is triggering something in her. That actually explained a lot. So what happens now? The board is going to censure her, Donald said. We're putting restrictions on her authority to file complaints or issue fines without board approval. If she violates those restrictions, we'll remove her as president. Will that actually stop her? I asked. Donald sighed. Honestly, I don't know, but it's all we can do right now. I thanked Donald for letting me know and drove home feeling like I was in some kind of surreal nightmare. All I wanted to do was run my business and live my life. And instead, I was caught in an escalating war with a woman who seemed to have made destroying me her personal mission. The cease and desist letter apparently did not deter Patricia. If anything, it seemed to make her more determined. Over the next month, I received 3 more city complaints from different agencies. One claimed I was disposing of grease illegally. One claimed I was operating without proper health permits, and one claimed I was violating noise ordinances. Every single complaint was investigated and found to be baseless. Every single complaint was filed by Patricia Henderson. After the 3rd complaint, the city attorney's office called me. Mr. Davidson, we're aware of the situation with Miss Henderson. We're opening an investigation into her repeated false reports. Would you be willing to provide a statement? Absolutely, I said. I met with an assistant city attorney named Jennifer Walcott, who took a detailed statement about everything that had happened. I provided copies of all the violation notices, the cease and desist letter, and the documentation from each city investigation. This is pretty egregious, Jennifer said after reviewing everything. Miss Henderson has wasted significant city resources by filing these false complaints. We're going to charge her with misuse of government services and possibly criminal harassment. What does that mean for me? I asked. It means she'll be facing criminal penalties and will be ordered to cease all contact with you, Jennifer explained. If she violates that order, she could face jail time. Good, I said. I felt no sympathy for Patricia anymore. She had pushed this beyond a simple HOA dispute into criminal behavior. The charges against Patricia were filed in early July. According to Marcus, who kept track of the court proceedings, Patricia hired an expensive attorney and tried to argue that she was simply fulfilling her duties as HOA president. The judge was not sympathetic. At the hearing, which I attended, the prosecutor presented all the evidence of Patricia's repeated false complaints and the city's wasted investigative resources. The judge found Patricia guilty of misuse of government services and criminal harassment. Patricia was sentenced to 6 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution to the city for the cost of the false investigations, which totaled over $3,000. She was also issued a restraining order prohibiting her from contacting me or filing any complaints related to my property. Most significantly, the judge ordered Patricia to resign from the HOA board immediately. I watched Patricia's face as the judge delivered the sentence. She looked stunned, as if she couldn't believe this was actually happening to her. Her attorney tried to argue for leniency, but the judge cut him off. Miss Henderson, you abused your position of authority to harass a neighbor who was doing nothing wrong, the judge said sternly. You wasted city resources, filed false reports, and made this man's life miserable for months. This behavior is unacceptable, and you're fortunate you're not facing more serious charges. After the hearing, Marcus and I walked out of the courthouse together. It's finally over, he said. Is it though? I asked. What's to stop her from continuing after her probation ends? The restraining order is permanent, Marcus said, and she has a criminal record now. If she violates the order, she goes to jail. Plus, she's off the HOA board. She has no authority over you anymore. That evening, I got a call from Gary Feldman. Wesley, I wanted to let you know that the board accepted Patricia's resignation. We've also passed a resolution formally apologizing to you for the harassment you experienced and reimbursing you for any legal fees related to defending against the false violations. I appreciate that, I said. Who's taking over as president? We're holding elections next month, Gary said. But in the meantime, Sharon Wu is acting president. Between you and me, things are going to be very different around here. Patricia's behavior opened a lot of eyes about how the HOA was being run. Over the following weeks, life slowly returned to normal. Patricia kept her distance, constrained by the restraining order and presumably chastened by her criminal conviction. The new HOA leadership was reasonable and focused on actual community issues rather than petty complaints. My catering business continued to thrive. In fact, the publicity from the court case brought me some unexpected attention. A local news station did a story about my battle with the HOA, framing it as a case of small business perseverance against bureaucratic harassment. The story went viral online, and I got dozens of new catering inquiries. Claire and I celebrated one evening in August with dinner on our back patio, the same patio where my legally permitted propane tanks sat in their neat, safe, fire marshal-approved arrangement. You know what's ironic? Claire said, sipping her wine. Patricia tried so hard to get rid of your business that she ended up making it more successful. I thought about that, I said, but I also think about how much stress and money all of this cost. If she had just left me alone from the beginning, none of this would have happened. Some people can't help themselves, Claire said. They see someone else succeeding and they have to tear them down. A few weeks later, I ran into Donald Kramer at the grocery store. We talked briefly, and he mentioned that Patricia and her husband had put their house on the market. I think the whole thing was too embarrassing for them, Donald said. Between the criminal charges and having to resign from the board, I don't think Patricia could face the neighborhood anymore. I felt a complicated mix of emotions hearing that. Part of me was glad she was leaving, but part of me felt bad that things had escalated to the point where she felt she had to move. I never wanted any of this, I told Donald. I just wanted to run my business. I know, Donald said. And for what it's worth, you handled everything with a lot more grace than I would have. Patricia pushed and pushed, and you just kept presenting facts and following the law. That's why you won. In September, the HOA held its elections. Sharon Wu was elected president, and 2 new board members who I didn't know very well joined. At the first meeting under the new leadership, Sharon proposed several changes to how the HOA operated, including clearer guidelines for violation complaints and a requirement that all fines be approved by a majority of the board rather than issued unilaterally. The changes passed unanimously. By October, Patricia and her husband had moved out. I never saw them again and never learned where they went. Their house sold quickly to a young family with 2 kids who were friendly and normal. One Saturday morning, I was loading equipment into my catering truck for an event when the new neighbor, a guy named Eric, came over to introduce himself. "Hey, you're Wesley, right? I'm Eric. Just moved in across the way." "Nice to meet you," I said, shaking his hand. "So I heard you run a catering business," Eric asked. "That's awesome. My wife and I are planning our daughter's first birthday party next month. Any chance you'd be available?" I smiled. "Absolutely. Let me give you my card." As Eric walked back to his house, I finished loading my truck and took a moment to look around the neighborhood. The morning was beautiful, the weather just starting to cool from the brutal Phoenix summer. My house looked good, my business was thriving, and the nightmare with Patricia was finally over. Claire came out with a travel mug of coffee for me. "Ready to go?" "Yeah," I said, taking the coffee and kissing her. "Ready." I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and headed out for the day's event. As I drove through the neighborhood streets, past well-maintained lawns and quiet houses, I thought about everything that had happened over the past several months. The whole ordeal had taught me some important lessons about standing up for yourself, the importance of documentation, and how some people will abuse whatever small amount of power they're given. It had also taught me that most people are reasonable, and that when you're in the right, the system generally works, even if it takes time and effort. I had fought back against an HOA president who tried to destroy my business through harassment and false complaints. I had proven that my propane tanks were legal and permitted. I had documented everything, stayed calm, and let the facts speak for themselves. And in the end, justice had prevailed. Patricia Henderson faced criminal charges, lost her position, and ultimately left the neighborhood. The HOA reformed its policies. My business was stronger than ever. As I merged onto the highway heading toward my event in Scottsdale, I realized I felt genuinely happy for the first time in months. The weight of constant conflict and worry had finally lifted. My phone rang through the truck speakers. It was Marcus. "Hey Wesley, just calling to check in. Everything good?" "Everything's great," I said. "Heading to an event. No HOA drama to report," Marcus laughed. "Music to my ears. You know, I've been thinking about your case a lot." It's a perfect example of why documentation is so important. If you hadn't kept records of everything, gathered those statements from neighbors, installed those cameras, this could have gone very differently. "Trust me, I know," I said. "I'm never deleting anything now. I'm going to keep every receipt, every permit, and every email forever." "That's probably wise," Marcus said, "but hopefully you won't need them. Enjoy your event." After we hung up, I drove in comfortable silence for a while, thinking about the future. Claire and I had been talking about maybe buying a bigger property in a year or two, somewhere with a dedicated commercial kitchen so I could expand the business. Maybe somewhere without an HOA. But for now, I was content. My little house in Phoenix, with its legally permitted propane tanks and its HOA that had finally learned to leave me alone, was home. The event that day went perfectly. I served 150 people at a corporate retreat, and the client was so happy they booked me for 3 more events on the spot. As I packed up my equipment that evening, tired but satisfied, I got a text from Claire. "Patricia's house sold. New family moving in next week. Also, I made your favorite dinner." I smiled and texted back, "On my way home." The drive back gave me time to reflect on how much had changed. 6 months ago, I had been facing $2,000 in fines and the threat of a lien on my house. I had been stressed, angry, and unsure if I'd be able to keep my business. Now, Patricia was gone, the HOA was under new management, and my business was more successful than ever. The story had even attracted positive media attention, which led to new clients and opportunities. Sometimes, I thought, standing up for yourself and refusing to be bullied is the hardest thing to do. It would have been easier to just pay the initial fine, or move the propane tanks, or even shut down my business. But I knew I was in the right, and I refused to let Patricia's unreasonable harassment dictate my life. When I got home, Claire had made chicken parmesan, and we ate on the patio as the sun set over Phoenix. The city lights began twinkling in the distance, and the temperature dropped to something almost comfortable. "I'm proud of you," Claire said suddenly, "for how you handled all of this. A lot of people would have given up." "I couldn't give up," I said. "This business is everything I've worked for." And more than that, I was right. I hate giving in when I know I'm right. "Well, your stubbornness paid off," Claire said with a smile. "We finished dinner and went inside, and I spent the evening doing paperwork and confirming bookings for the next month." October was going to be busy, which was exactly what I wanted. A few days later, I got a call from the Phoenix Fire Marshal's office. It was Inspector Torres. "Mr. Davidson, I heard about your situation with your HOA," he said. "I wanted to reach out and let you know that if you ever need anything or if anyone questions your permits again, don't hesitate to call me directly." "I appreciate that," I said. "Hopefully, it won't be necessary anymore." "I hope not too," Inspector Torres said. "But I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've seen HOAs cause all kinds of problems. Just know that you've got the fire marshal's office in your corner. Your setup is one of the best I've seen for home-based catering operations." That call meant a lot to me. It was validation that I had done everything right from the beginning, and that the problems I had faced were entirely due to Patricia's personal vendetta, not any actual issues with my business. In November, I was invited to speak at a small business association meeting about my experience. I talked about the importance of permits, documentation, and knowing your rights. Several other home-based business owners approached me afterward with their own HOA horror stories. "The difference is you fought back," one woman told me. "Most of us just pay the fines because it's easier. But you proved they can be held accountable." I had not set out to become some kind of advocate against HOA overreach, but I realized my case had struck a chord with people. There were thousands of home-based businesses in the Phoenix area, and many of them probably faced similar challenges. By December, as the year drew to a close, I looked back on everything that had happened with a mixture of disbelief and satisfaction. What had started as an outrageous fine for legal propane tanks had turned into a months-long battle involving lawyers, city agencies, court hearings, and ultimately criminal charges. But I had won. Patricia had been held accountable for her harassment. The HOA had reformed. And my business was thriving. On Christmas Eve, Claire and I hosted a small dinner party for some of our neighbors, including the Petersons, Sarah Martinez, and David and Jennifer Wung. These were the people who had stood by me during the HOA fight, and I wanted to thank them. As we sat around the table, Jim Peterson raised his glass. A toast to Wesley, for not letting the bastards grind him down. Everyone laughed and clinked glasses. It felt good to be surrounded by supportive neighbors in a community that had finally found some peace. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Claire and I stood in the driveway looking at the Christmas lights we had put up. They were tasteful and within HOA guidelines, though under Sharon Wu's leadership, the HOA had become much more relaxed about such things. "You know what I realized?" Claire said. "Patricia actually did us a favor in a weird way." "How do you figure that?" I asked. "Well, before all this happened, you were just running your business and keeping to yourself. Now you've got a stronger network, more clients, relationships with city officials, and you know exactly what your rights are. You're in a better position than you were before." She was right. The ordeal had forced me to become more organized, more knowledgeable, and more connected. I had learned about local regulations, built relationships with fire and code enforcement, and developed a reputation for standing up for what was right. "I guess that's true," I said, "but I still would have preferred to skip the whole thing." "Of course," Claire agreed. "But since we couldn't skip it, at least we came out ahead." As we headed back inside, I took one last look at my propane tanks, still sitting exactly where they had always been, properly secured and legally permitted. They had become a symbol of the whole fight, those tanks. Patricia had seen them as a violation, but they were actually evidence of how carefully I followed the rules. The new year brought new opportunities. I was contacted by a local business magazine that wanted to do a feature article about my catering company. The article focused not just on the food but on my journey of standing up to HOA harassment and building a successful business despite the obstacles. When the article came out in February, I got a surge of new inquiries. People wanted to support a business owner who had fought back against injustice. It was incredibly gratifying. One afternoon in March, almost exactly a year after the initial violation notice, I was home doing paperwork when I saw Sharon Wu walking up my driveway. My first instinct was wariness, but I reminded myself that Sharon was reasonable and had actually supported me. "Hi, Wesley," she said when I opened the door. "Do you have a minute?" "Sure, come in," I said, leading her to the living room. "I wanted to update you on some things," Sharon said. "The board has been reviewing our CC and RTCS, and we've made some significant changes. We've clarified the rules around home-based businesses, established clearer procedures for filing complaints, and implemented oversight to prevent the kind of abuse you experienced." "That's good to hear," I said. "We're also working on a community reputation issue," Sharon continued. "What happened with Patricia made the news, and it gave our HOA a black eye. We want people to know that we're not like that anymore. Would you be willing to serve on a community relations committee? I think having you involved would send a strong message." I considered it carefully. Part of me wanted nothing to do with the HOA ever again, but another part of me recognized that getting involved could help ensure nothing like this happened to anyone else. "I'll think about it," I told Sharon. "Let me talk to Claire." That evening, Claire and I discussed Sharon's offer. "I think you should do it," Claire said. "You've got the experience and the credibility, and maybe you can help make sure the HOA actually serves the community instead of harassing people." So I agreed. I joined the Community Relations Committee and spent the next several months helping to rewrite policies and improve communication between the HOA and homeowners. It was not always easy, and there were still some difficult personalities to deal with, but overall, the experience was positive. By the summer, the neighborhood felt completely different. The new HOA leadership was transparent and reasonable. Violation complaints were down significantly because the rules were clearer and more fairly enforced. Several other home-based business owners in the neighborhood, who had been operating quietly in fear of attracting attention, felt comfortable being open about their work. One day in July, I was loading my truck for an event when Eric, my neighbor, came over. "Hey, Wesley, I wanted to tell you something," he said. "When we were house hunting, our realtor warned us about this neighborhood because of the HOA drama, but then she told us about how you fought back and how things had changed. That's actually what convinced us to buy here. We wanted to be in a place where people stand up for what's right." That might have been the most meaningful compliment I had received through the whole ordeal. The idea that my fight had actually improved the community and made it a better place to live gave me a sense of purpose beyond just defending my business. As another year passed, the memories of the conflict with Patricia began to fade, replaced by the routines of normal life and successful business. My catering company continued to grow. Claire and I got engaged. The HOA functioned smoothly under Sharon's leadership. One afternoon, I was in my garage organizing equipment when I found the original violation notice from Patricia, the one demanding $2,000 for my propane tanks. I stood there holding it, remembering the anger and fear I had felt when I first read it. But I also remembered Inspector Torres's letter confirming everything was legal. I remembered my neighbors standing up for me. I remembered the judge sentencing Patricia. I remembered Gary Feldman's apology on behalf of the board. I thought about throwing the notice away, but instead, I put it in a frame and hung it in my home office. Not as a trophy exactly, but as a reminder. A reminder that standing up for yourself matters, that documentation and truth prevail, that bullies can be stopped. And most importantly, that propane tanks, when properly permitted and maintained, are just propane tanks. Nothing more, nothing less. The fire marshal said so. I returned to loading my truck, looking forward to another successful event. The Arizona sun was bright. My business was thriving, and life was good. Patricia Henderson was a distant memory, and the HOA that had once tried to find me out of existence was now an organization I voluntarily served on a committee for. Sometimes I thought as I drove out of the neighborhood, justice takes time and effort, but it's worth fighting for. Every single time. The propane tanks gleamed in my rearview mirror, sitting exactly where they belonged, legal and permitted and perfectly safe. And I smiled, knowing I had won not just a battle with an HOA, but something bigger. I had defended my right to earn an honest living, and in doing so, I had helped make my entire community a better, fairer place. That more than anything made the whole ordeal worthwhile.